Great. So welcome to another happiness class. Let me just tell you the very basics of this as fast as I can. So I do this every week in Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, Central London, 2 p.m. Do come down if you want to interact with me. There's loads of interaction outside the class. This is a happiness class. This is lesson 32 of 33, almost the end, and I'm going to repeat back to the beginning. Do check out bigquestionsanswer.com and let's just get started. What do you really need? Okay, I do this stuff because 0% about money. It's all about making a difference, and I see places where people are really happy and where places are really unhappy. I might be asking questions if you're interested in answering them, right? But what do you think about this, right? First of all, let me ask you guys a question. Have you ever thought about what do you really need?
More recently, I've started to think like that. What do I actually need? Yeah, very recently.
What about you?
Why do you think
food? Okay. He's already done a one-word answer that I was going to ask for later on, right? But let's do it right now, right? Okay. To help us really quickly get to what we really need, and by the way, where do I get my ideas from? I'm based on science, psychology, logic, and inspired by Islam, but you don't have to be a Muslim to understand it. It's just like, I think it helps me get to the important bits of psychology that loads of people are missing in a materialistic world, right? So anyway, this is what I think is really helpful. If we start categorizing, one is visible versus invisible needs. So you mentioned food, right? There's also entertainment, right? These are visible needs, right? And then there's the invisible: love, meaning. Do you know what I mean by meaning, right? Like, do meaningful work, right? Oneness, like feeling connected to other people, connected to nature. These are not just spiritual ideas. Psychologists talk about them all the time. There's something. I don't know what people know. I like to ask around, but who's heard of the Lost Connections? Johann Hari. Right, so he talks about, he's done a survey of all the greatest psychologists at the moment, what they think about happiness, right, and what they talk about the opposite, which is depression. And he made a list of 9 things called the lost connections, like connection between people, meaningful work, and all these kind of things, right? So all the oneness with nature. By the way, the most powerful antidepressant is just being in nature. This is not made up stuff. This is known in psychology, but the public generally don't know, and that's why I talk about it. What the public think and what psychologists and scientists say are literally the opposite, almost. Like the public say you don't need meaning in your life. Right, that's a public thing. Like there's movies literally making fun of the idea of having meaning. Like there's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which literally makes fun of the idea of having meaning. It says the meaning of life is 42 and stuff like that, and you can't work it out, right? And Elon Musk even listened to that movie, by the way. He mentioned it, right? So, but funnily, psychologists say literally the opposite. You need meaning to be happy, right? So let me get back to those categories. There's the visible and there's the visible and the invisible. If we have too much food, do you know what happens?
He
get fat, right? Okay. One of the many diseases in the West are. One of the biggest killers actually is obesity, and from obesity you get things like diabetes. So my point, roughly, very quickly, is that if you have too much of the visible stuff, it actually makes you sick, right? Too much entertainment, too much YouTube, instead of talking to human beings, makes you lonely, right? Do you know the actual biggest killer in London? Do you want to guess? Does anybody want to guess? What's the actual biggest killer in London? You want to guess what it is? Close.
The biggest killer?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It rhymes. It has an L to start off with.
I think stress.
It comes from that loneliness. Right? Okay. So why would we be lonely when we're surrounded by so many people? It's because we choose to just watch Netflix instead of talk to people. I'm not anti-Netflix. I'm just saying you should have a balance, right? Okay. So visible, too much of it, bad for you. But invisible, connection and all these things, we need more of, and we're dying from because we're not having enough. Okay. So what's my point? I like to say, okay, I'm almost at the point. So where we can see where the visible stuff goes, the food, it goes in our bodies, comes out the other side, all that kind of stuff, right? What part of our body needs this invisible stuff called love and meaning and oneness. Wait, where does that go? Which part of our body needs? Right. So you pointed there and there, right? For now, I'm just going to call it the soul. For now, right? But now, and in like a couple of seconds, right now, actually, I think it's time to prove that the soul exists. And you might say, "Oh no, we're getting spiritual, right? We're not getting real." And I'm going to tell you again, the psychologists say exact opposite. We just don't know. Okay, so I'm going to prove it in 3 ways: our common experience, then the science, and then a bit of logic. How to prove that the soul exists, and it's really simple. Our experiences, very common experiences, that if you do bad stuff, you can't sleep well at night. Right? What is that part of the body that's telling you off for behaving badly? This is a common experience. When I mention that phrase, because that's literally a phrase in English that says, "How do you sleep at night?" You know that phrase. It's so common that we got an understanding that you do something bad, it bites you in the backside, right? And you can't get away from it. That's just a common experience. What are your thoughts about that? That's not even getting to the science yet. There's the science behind the soul. But any thoughts about it?
That's interesting. I've never actually thought about that. But there's a lot of words in the English language that suggest something that we're not actually aware of. Suggest things like that, don't they?
Right. And the reason why we don't think about it so much because we've been let's say, trained by advertisers to only think material, because they want us to never have inner peace, because as long as we don't have inner peace, we'll keep buying their products. Yeah. So there's a reason why we don't understand the concept of the soul, even though we feel it all the time. We get depressed. When you're depressed, you're not physically feeling pain. Or you do feel pain, kind of, but it's kind of a side effect of feeling empty and pointless, without meaning. Right? Okay, so we experience these things all the time, but we ignore them because we're only being taught to only think in material terms. And that's not making us happy, because that's not where happiness lies. Okay, so I talked about the common experience, but let's talk about the science. So I talk about the science of psychology, right? And the science of psychology is long said, so Freud, he talks about the conscience. Right? And he talks about it as a personality. What does that mean? It means something that has its own life that you can't control. So exactly that thing. You know when you rob a bank? You know when you rob a bank, right? Yeah? Okay, I'm just checking if you're really listening.
No, I haven't robbed a bank.
Okay, alright. Okay, so if you do rob a bank, you can probably imagine you might feel a bit bad about it, but you don't really want to feel bad about it. You want to feel good about it, right? Okay, but Freud says there's this thing called a conscience that has its own personality that doesn't listen to you. It still tells you you're bad. And then my favorite psychologist, Viktor Frankl, one of my favorite psychologists, because he's just like the main psychologist on the topic of happiness, right? Yeah, so you know about him.
Yeah, man, Jewish.
What have you heard about him?
He survived the Holocaust, I think.
Yeah, that's true. And so he learned a lot by the extremes of the Holocaust, right? He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. That's one of his most famous books, right? Okay, and he says, he's a psychologist, right? Okay, and he says, if you want to be happy, all you have to do is listen to this conscience. We don't understand it, but it seems to know what you have to do. So simple. This is one of the greatest psychologists, and I like your facial expression. You're like saying, how comes I don't know about this, right? Okay, so this is one of the things I do. Besides my videos, if you go to my website, I have links for all the things I'm talking about. Videos, articles and things that you can go. So I've got summaries of everything I talk about and links to, so you can learn more and more. And you can, by the way, on my videos, you can ask me questions. I'm always responding. I answer so many questions all the time, right? Anyway, so that's the science. The science is behind the conscience. And I call the conscience the soul, right? You can call it anything you want, right? So there's the science, and then a bit of logic. You might like this. I hope you like this, right? Logic. How do we know we've got a soul? Okay, and I'll try to do this as fast as possible. It goes something like this. We were a sperm at one point, right? Okay, and then we met the egg, and that sperm, something happened to it. Basically died. Okay, and it became the egg. The egg had started splitting and became a baby, right? Now, what am I talking about here? There's a death of one sort and the birth, the beginning of a life of another sort, right? The death of the sperm, the beginning of a new life. And that new life is a higher form of life than the sperm, right? And then it repeats again. There's a baby in the womb versus a baby outside the womb, or the human being outside the womb. Okay? Do you know that the baby inside the womb depends on the umbilical cord, right? Okay? And do you know what it gets through the umbilical cord?
It's food, right? Food.
Right?
What the mom eats.
Absolutely everything. It breathes through the umbilical cord. It doesn't even use its lungs, right? Right? And my point is that for a baby to go from inside the womb to outside the womb, it has to sever its life support system. Right? So again, it's a second death from one form of life to a higher form of life. Would you say a baby outside the womb is much higher form of life because it's got eyes, it uses lungs, it can use its legs, and inside the womb, it lives in a tiny universe. Okay, now this is getting a bit long, so I'll try to describe it really quickly. Basically, you're going through a repeated cycle of death of a lower form to higher forms, which have, when I say higher form, they can express themselves more greatly, they're limited less, and so a soul is something we experience in this life. It's not made up. It's even understood by psychologists, and when you die in this life, it makes sense that the process should be repeated again. A higher form of life that's not limited to a body, multi-dimensional, blah blah blah. Just logic, right? Okay.
Are you saying that
Yeah.
when we die, are you saying that when we die, our soul evolves like, say, some kind of butterfly from a cocoon, and it evolves when we actually die?
Yeah, you could say it's continuously evolving. I want to talk to you because we missed that thing last time, yeah? Okay, but stick around for this, right? So I'm just talking very briefly. I'm saying, what do we need? And in short, so not everybody's getting bored, if I repeat everything, I don't want to repeat everything. We need the invisible stuff. We need love, we need meaning, and we need oneness, right? And the physical stuff doesn't make you happy. In fact, if you have too much of it, it makes you sick. That's my short, and I proved this through science and things like that. I proved this idea of the soul as well, right? And we can talk about it afterwards anyway. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about, okay, is what do you need to know about the soul, okay, to make you happy? And this is really important, okay? 3 things. One is that now we talked about this idea of we're continuously growing, right from the sperm all the way now, and we're continuously growing. That's very important for your happiness, because what people do is they look back at their lives and say, when was I happy? When I was a kid. And then they say, oh, I wish I should be like a kid, then I'll be happy. They try to have a simplistic life. That's why people get drunk. It stops part of their brain working, and they go crazy, and they think that'll make them happy, but it won't, because first of all, I've already said, meaning, happiness comes from meaning, and kids don't do meaning, right? So your soul is developing. How do we know we're always growing? Okay, think about, do you like wearing a nappy?
No.
No, right? But kids don't mind wearing a nappy because they have a lower level of consciousness, right? But when you grow out of that, you can't go back. You don't want to go back into the womb, for example, because of very limited life. That's like a prison sentence, right? So we're always growing. So number one is we're always evolving. And in Islam, there are 3 stages. There's the animal stage, where basically when you're a child, you're just going 100% by instinct, right? You're not like, should I be a vegan or not, like that. You're not making moral choices.
Hungry, sleepy, basic stuff.
Exactly, right? Okay, so when you grow out of that animal stage, you can't revert, because that's kind of like a lower form. You'll get depressed if you revert back to that, right? So the next thing, the really, really important thing, is what is your soul doing? In Islam, it's called the self-accusing soul. That's what in Islam is described, and it's a very important feature of the soul. Okay, the only way, if you want to be happy, or you want to be even confident, right? Okay, is you have to have that soul quiet, and the only way you can be quiet is if you listen to it rather than ignore it. So if you're doing something wrong, fix that and you'll automatically be confident. And that's just reverting exactly back to what Viktor Frankl said. But not only him, there's loads of great psychologists that are talking about it. Who's a fan of TED Talks? There's one of the most famous TED Talkers. You're a fan, right? Have you heard of Brené Brown? She talks about the power of vulnerability.
I can't recall, but I remember the name. I don't remember the talk.
Okay, do go to my website, and I'm going to post a video by tonight, and tomorrow morning it'll be there. And I put references along with the video, yeah? So do check it out. And she talks about this idea, the only way you can overcome shame was the opposite of happiness, right? The opposite of, so there's confidence. I'm going to try to stop using the word just happiness, and I'm trying to go between other features of our lives, right? So people really lack confidence, right? Okay, the opposite of confidence is shame, right? And she talks about if you want to avoid shame, it's not by fitting in, because people fit in, they're not really being their true selves. That's not confidence. That's just dying inside slowly. Right? You have to genuinely be yourself. But what does genuinely being yourself? There couldn't be anything more genuine than listening to your conscience, which is your true nature. That's all. So anyway, but Viktor Frankl says that anyway in a more simplistic way, right? So that's another thing. And the last thing is, where do we really want to go? Okay, with our soul. What does the soul really want? Okay, and I'll put it down to one word: oneness. That's the ultimate direction we're going. So what does that mean? You see, these are kind of the high. See, as the problem we're having with happiness is that we start from kind of, we're too much trapped in a materialistic viewpoint. So we don't find happiness because happiness is somewhere else. Happiness is not in a small space between pain and getting high. It's in a.
You can never reach happiness because when you get to happiness, you want more.
See, you're talking about materialistic happiness, which is addictive.
Yeah, but then how would you know? I'm not talking about materialistic, but I don't.
No, I'm saying that is exactly the definition of materialistic happiness. Materialistic happiness is never fulfilling.
Yeah,
So
if
because
I get a Ferrari tomorrow, I want a helicopter. I want a rocket, and I'll always want something
that's
more.
called materialistic happiness. So that's exactly what I mean. There's a small space between pain and getting high, and that's the small space you're talking about. And there's another dimension called peace.
So let me
So
give you the other
peace is not buying a Ferrari. Peace is doing stuff for other people, and you get increasingly
internal happiness. So how would you define that?
Say again once.
If I want to find internal happiness, not materialistic happiness, how will you define that happiness? How will I know I've got there?
So it's called inner peace, and it's lasting, and you'll know it because you experience that you get increasingly happy. It's the opposite experience, and this is a common. By the way, what I try to talk about is really simple stuff. I don't even try to get complicated. So what psychologists have said, Viktor Frankl, he will tell you it's exactly the same thing, and it's really simple. Is that just follow meaning, find meaning, and what is meaning is doing good things for other people. And there's loads of empirical evidence for this. So literally, since you've got a coffee with you, right? And you can try to imagine this, and I bet you would understand if you got a sense of feelings, right? If you bought a coffee for somebody else, you'll be more happy than. You agree, right?
Agreed, 100%.
Right.
Depend how my emotion is telling me. Depend how myself. I might be angry if I pay for somebody coffee because I want him to be himself, and I have support myself. So why should helping others would bring me happy if my heart doesn't say that?
So shall I put it this way? Okay, this is for people who are not dying. When you buy a coffee, it's not the kind of thing you buy when you're about to die. You probably have milk or water or something more basic, which is a bit cheaper than coffee, right? If you're really dying. So this is for people who've had loads and loads of coffees before, and they don't have a problem buying coffee, right? And so this is also statistically. So you might not feel it, but 99 other people will. So that's what I base this on. And human nature is common. So it could be the reason why you're not experiencing it because you don't understand what makes you happy. There's a reason why so many people are depressed, because they don't listen to what their inside is feeling, and that's because they've been trained out of understanding their own feeling, and then they end up punishing themselves. So, in short, human beings are social beings. They need connection. That will make them happy. If you don't think it makes you happy, that means we've got to talk about this, because you're going to inflict pain on yourself with that mindset.
We should listen to our hearts. We should listen to what our bodies say.
Listens to his emotions and makes him happy by
But
going.
what I don't agree is, if my body is not telling me to help others, and I do it against my will, then it will make pain for me as well.
Sure, don't do it against your will, but
Not 99% of human beings want to help others. It is not 99%.
If you like helping, you want to do it anyway.
Could be majority, maybe 51% they want help.
no. So
Majority, they want to keep themselves.
But if you don't want to help, you want to do it anyway, right?
So I'm not forcing. One of the things I do is I don't try to win a debate. Like, if you are set on saying, I definitely don't want to be nice to anybody, I'll let you do that, but I will feel sorry for you, because I know that's going to make you miserable, right? Because human beings, we're all basically the same inside. We are social. We are social. We need to be social. It's not like some people don't need to be social at all. If you think you're different to everybody,
You are not clear on your claim. You should be clear. You say
but I teach a lot of autistic people, and they need to be social as well. They're not
what makes human being happy is to follow his soul,
right.
to follow his body, what he's telling me.
So yeah, all I'm gonna say is I'm gonna move.
It will pain me, yes, because I feel sorry.
Why?
Why?
Killing people.
But if my body is telling me don't give, I don't give. Because if I give, when I go home, I will cry for this £2, so I paid coffee for
You
Steve.
wouldn't give anyway.
Yeah, don't do it if you don't want to do it. But I'm recommending. I'm just going to leave that bit of discussion for people to think for themselves, because I let people reflect. But I really recommend, for your sake, that you do, because I think you're completely wrong and you're out of touch with your feelings. But we can talk about this later. I'm not being a yeah. Okay. Can I just do a test? Shake my hand. Right? How do you feel? Right? It makes a bit. Well, you shouldn't. If you feel a bit weird, that's another problem. Actually, it's actually part of.
Cultures would feel very uncomfortable.
In Islam, it's actually a teach. Yeah, thank you. But come and join me for a second. Come and join. Okay. Oh, you're still doing your thing, right? Okay. So you're talking about pedophile, right? You're talking about pedophile, something like
I'm just saying, you're saying that whatever you're feeling, you should do.
Right.
That keeps you happy. What about some mass murderer or some pedophile that feels that his happiness is in messing around with kids?
Right. Okay, so I think being a pedophile is increasingly a Western thing, okay? And the reason why is because people are so isolated from each other that they find they have to.
That from that is a Western thing.
I don't really notice it so much.
In Africa, it's massive.
I could be wrong, right? Okay, but let me just talk about some of my experiences and my discussions, right? Okay, so when I was living in the Middle East, okay, well, I'm working as a teacher, right? And it would be not uncommon for a shopkeeper sitting at the shop just to say, I want to talk to your son. He didn't even ask, he just says, I'm going to talk to your son, give him a sweet or whatever. And there is none of that disconnection between people, right? But when you don't have, and we have a massive amount of disconnection, so much distrust, and no love, and no family life, and so many other things, people can get really lost, and they try to find alternative ways of finding happiness, right? And it gets really messed up, is what I mean. So I kind of feel sorry for pedophiles, because I think they're basically messed up inside, and they're trying to find happiness in a messed up way. I call it, yeah, it's just a mental health problem, basically. Yeah. Do you want to add something?
No.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. So that's basically it. Thank you for listening. All I talk about is really basic things. I hope it benefits people in some ways.
Your YouTube channel?
So I do share out. Go to bigquestionsanswer.com. That's the easiest way.
Big question.
Yeah, but I'll give you my number and card with my YouTube channel as well, which is basically my name, Khalid Safir. Yeah. So I'll just give it to you. I'll stop recording it. Okay, cool.